Morning everyone, thank you for joining our webinar today where we're going to run you through the SYSIS solution and how you can revolutionise your security validation processes with SYSIS's automated penetration testing platform. So the deck we're going to run through today, a few slides about kind of what the challenge is and what SYSIS looks to solve, what's going on out there in the market at the moment and how can penetration testing help you with those challenges. Then we'll look at the SYSIS solution itself in some depth. What does it do? How's it deployed? How does it operate? The features and USPs of it. Then towards the end of the presentation, we'll run you through a quick 5-minute demo video so you actually get to see what this tool looks like when it's in action on your network, running an automated pen test and watching that play out. Then we'll talk sample customers, and of course, if anyone has any questions following this webinar, you can get in touch with the guys at EAC and we'll be happy to run through any queries that you've got. So to start with, we look at what the challenge is, why the SYSIS tool came into existence. Essentially, the vendor feel that those responsible for cybersecurity, no matter what capacity that's in, whether you're a CISO, whether you're an IT director, whether you're a security engineer, you're faced with an unfair challenge in that often you have a limited team with a limited amount of resource, a limited amount of financial backing, and you've got to keep your head above the water with a new threat, a new vulnerability, new issues and techniques that attackers are using in the landscape. And often you're outnumbered because there's a plethora of new threats and issues that are constantly changing and constantly evolving. You have to try and combat all of that with that limited team and limited financial resource. Now, we see organizations across all verticals spending millions on cybersecurity and still being breached. So if we look at some high profile examples this year, we've seen the likes of Twitter, we've seen the likes of EasyJet, we've seen the likes of a couple of universities up and down the country all get breached. And you can guarantee that all of them would have had a security posture in place that have been spending money on security tools, which ultimately let them down. What this tool looks to do is actively find those problems on your network using the same techniques as an attacker would. So stress test your security posture on a constant basis to show you where those issues are and show you how to fix them before an attacker gets there. So fighting fire with fire, if you like, using the same protocols that an attacker would look to use in your network to find those problems and deal with them before they become a big issue for you. In terms of why we need to look at this on a constant basis, we've got the fact that attackers are continuously looking to get into a network. For those of you that have undertaken penetration testing in the past, often we see organizations doing this on an annual basis, maybe quarterly for those that are a little bit more mature in their security posture. The problem with this is that attackers don't just try and get into your network once, and if they fail, look to come back and try next year. They're constantly trying to gain an advantage. Whether their motives are financial or political, whatever it might be, they're going to look to use automation themselves to get into your network, which is why we're seeing the big increase with things like ransomware and malware. If we're going to be able to contend with that, we need to fight fire with fire and use automation ourselves to try and find those weaknesses, find those loopholes, and block them before an attacker gets there. We've also got the fact that IT networks are constantly changing and growing, which leads to our attack surface changing as well. So if we have a penetration test or an assessment done today, we understand where the problems are today, but next week, if we change our network, make some config changes, add some new tools, bring some new people into the organization, suddenly those changes can bring with them new risks that weren't there when we did our assessment last week, last month, whenever it was. So what we need is a way of finding those vulnerabilities as they surface. Whenever the network changes, we need something that can tell us whether those changes bring with them any new risk. And that's exactly what this tool gives you, which we'll go on to talk about in some more depth. Now, previously, penetration testing as a manual process has been a great way to get an understanding of what an attacker could do in your network if they did manage to breach your perimeter. So for those that haven't had a penetration test done before, it's essentially a process whereby an ethical hacker, someone with ethical means and without malicious intent, comes into your network and looks to find the problems, looks to say, right, what can I do here? If I were looking to encrypt your files, or if I were looking to steal data, where could I get to? What could I get my hands on? What would that impact be? And they do so by using the same tools, the same techniques as an attacker would in your network. So you get a real perspective of what could happen to me and to my organization if someone got in. The problem with manual penetration testing, as with anything that's manual, you're relying on that particular person performing on that particular day. So let's say the penetration test is in your organization for a day or maybe even a week or a couple of weeks. You're only going to get visibility of what's happening when they're in that environment and what's taking place. As soon as they leave, as I said earlier, if any changes occur to the network, if those changes do bring about new risk, we're not going to get visibility of that until a pen tester is back in again. You're also reliant on that person finding absolutely everything, and that's not often the case. There is a skills gap in the cybersecurity industry, so if you have the best penetration tester in the world, likely they are going to find everything. Perhaps you can't afford the best penetration tester in the world, so you're going to use someone who's slightly not skilled that isn't going to find absolutely every vulnerability in your organization. Now, with CISIS, we'll talk about it shortly, but it's an automated platform. It can perform tasks at a far greater speed and uncover every hole far quicker than a human can, and we've got some examples of that we'll run into. But essentially, the problem with manual PT is that it is that snapshot in time. You're only getting visibility of what happens when that tester is there. You're also having to spend a lot of money to get that tester there in the first place. Now, that doesn't lend itself to a continuous and consistent methodology. If we're only getting a point in time snapshot, we're not getting visibility of our continuous security posture throughout the year, and you're not always going to have consistency between what one penetration tester finds and what the next one does. Now, that's where the CISIS tool comes in. So the CISIS platform that they've developed is called Pentera. It is the only automated penetration testing platform on the market that can give you all of that insight that a pen tester can, but in an automated, software-based, easy to deploy, easy to run solution. You don't need to be a penetration tester to operate this tool. As we'll see shortly, the interface is very simple, very clean, and it can give you actionable insights as to what can an attacker do and how do I go about fixing that. Now, when the Pentera platform is deployed into a network, the preference is to put it on a physical machine within your environment. You can put it on a VM, but the reason that we say physical is best is because it will utilize a graphics card within the spec of that unit to crack passwords at a very, very fast rate. Now, once you've deployed this solution to the physical machine, it's licensed based on the number of IPs in your organization. So let's say you have 500 IPs in your network and you buy a 3-year license of Pentera. You can run a penetration test against those 500 hosts in your environment every single day for the next 3 years, as many times as you want. You can do it daily, you can do it weekly, you can do it monthly, whatever you see fit really. Or you could run a bespoke test every time. If there's a big significant change that's been made to your network, test to see whether that change has opened up any weakness for you. Now, once you've deployed it and pressed play, these are the steps that it goes through. The first two, it's going to essentially work out what is on the network that it's looking at. Is it looking at workstations? Is it looking at printers or servers or cameras or switches? And have any of those hosts got any vulnerabilities in them from a static sense? Is anything unpatched or outdated is what we mean by static. It's then going to start looking for dynamic vulnerabilities. So it's going to look at, can I, as a potential attacker on this network, sniff user credentials, sniff traffic, and gather information about the users on here? If I can pick up usernames and hashes, can I crack the passwords of those users and gain access to their clear text login credentials? If not, can I take the usernames and hashes and relay them around the network and gather any information in doing so? It's then going to look to inject harmless files designed to look like malware to stress test your antivirus. If your antivirus blocks those files, then fantastic. We validate that the AV is doing its job, performing as it should. If perhaps the AV doesn't block that file and it lets it through, that could be a deficiency within the AV tool itself. Maybe it's not up to scratch, or perhaps a configuration issue of that particular AV on that particular host. Either way, we'll show you that. We'll test the performance of your tools like antivirus, of your internal firewalls, of the platforms that you're putting in place that you've been told by a vendor that it does a particular job. We'll make sure that tool is doing that job. Pentera will then look to gather information about who it finds on the network and what it finds, and use that to move laterally. Perhaps if you've got an organization that's split across multiple sites, can it get from site A to site B? Therefore, could an attacker do the same? Can it escalate its privilege through the organization to get its hands on user information of those more senior users in the network, your domain admins, etc.? If it can do that, it will show you at every point what it did, how it did these things, the path that it took, and the techniques that it used, and it will report back on all of that instantly in a nice, easy to digest, easy to action report. And then at the end of any pen test run, it will clean up what it did. So if it managed to inject a file that got past your AV, for example, it will go and delete that file. So you're not left with any breadcrumbs on the network, anything that shouldn't be there. Whenever a SYSIS run finishes, your network is left in exactly the same state as it was before. So the tool is an agentless platform, very easy to deploy, plug and play, nice and simple. You don't need to roll out a software agent onto every endpoint, which saves a big headache. Everything the tool does is designed to be completely safe and controlled. So it wouldn't be a particularly strong business model for SYSIS if they were taking networks down, causing customers harm. When you run this on an organization, you as the user won't notice that anything is going on. If you have tools on your network that are specifically designed to spot malicious activity, then hopefully they're pinging you alerts saying this doesn't quite look right, this needs to be actioned. But the tool itself will not cause any lockout, any downtime, any issues to your network. It's been designed by penetration testers. So the founder of SYSIS was a man called Eric Liebezon, who headed up the Israeli military's penetration testing platform and team for around 10 years. So his R&D team are all people that are penetration testers themselves. They understand the nuances of pen testing and will ultimately make sure that any exploit that goes into this tool is tested and completely safe before it's rolled out. Every exploit that's used is mapped to the MITRE framework. Now, some of you may have heard of this, some of you haven't. The MITRE framework is essentially a list of all of the types of exploits and attacks that malicious attackers will use in the wild. Now, we'll show you what types of exploits were used at different points, but also how that meant that the SYSIS machine could move through the network. So perhaps it got a foothold by running a type of exploit here. It then took these steps which led it to a particular achievement. That might be extracting information or taking control of a particularly high privileged user. Either way, we'll show you the path that an attacker could take, as well as how you can put steps in place during this to block off this path at an early stage. So maybe there's one fix that neutralizes this entire attack vector. If that's the case, we'll point out what that is and how you go about fixing that particular issue to ensure that you remediate in the swiftest way possible. Whenever the run's finished, as I said, you get instant access to the reports that are going to run you through everything that's good in your organization, places where your security tools blocked what the SYSIS machine was looking to do, as well as the bad. So areas perhaps where the SYSIS machine was able to carry out achievements, where you now need to address your security posture in a certain way. We'll point out both. We'll show you overall what your score was as an organization and everything you now need to go and fix to ensure that that score is better the next time you run SYSIS. Now we're going to run through the product demo video here. As I said, short 5-minute video that will just show you what this interface looks like, how easy it is to run a pen test with SYSIS and get actionable insights based on what it finds. Now, the first thing that we do when setting up a SYSIS run is decide what type of test we want to run. The default mode is what's called a black box test. So that is essentially a test that will operate in the same way as an attacker with no prior information given to that attacker. They make their way onto the network, but then they have to work out who's who, what's what, and where they can go. We'll run the demo in that particular mode, but the other types of tests that you can do, you can run a targeted test. So that will be testing specific elements in your network. So you might just want to test the performance of your antivirus by trying to inject payloads. That's fine. You can do a specific test with that. You might want to just test your password policy and the strength of it. You can test that specific element. You also have what if scenarios, which are kind of but they're called grey box scenarios, but it will be what would happen if this particular user were to click on a phishing link, for example, or what would happen if this particular host was injected with malware or ransomware. You can test really specific scenarios to see what the impact would be, perhaps if someone who should have low privileged rights clicks on an email that they shouldn't. Does that then mean that that attacker can escalate their way through the network and get their hands on your most critical files or assets? You can also run this tool in just a normal vulnerability assessment mode, which will look for any outdated hosts or any hosts that have known vulnerabilities in them, things like WannaCry and Eternal Blue. If you wanted to just hunt for that specific vulnerability, you can do that as well. Now in this mode, we're going to run it in black box. So as if an attacker has just got onto the network for the first time and has to work out everything for themselves. You define how you want the attack to look. So give this particular template a name and tell it a particular IP range that you want it to go after. That could be your entire network, that could be a subset or a department, it's completely up to you. Anything you want to exclude from the range, if you've got third-party assets on site that don't belong to you as the organization, you don't want to test them. How long you want the test to last for, in terms of days or hours, and how noisy or stealthy you want this machine to be. Do you want it to act like a script kiddie, looking to just gather information and alert, not worry about alerting your security tools, or do you want it to be stealthy and act like a nation state attacker, someone who knows what they're doing? You can choose whether you need it to ask for your approval before carrying out some of the more aggressive exploits. We'll see that functionality here in the demo. That's kind of, if you're running this for the first time and you were concerned about any of the exploits that you're running, you could run it in approvals mode. Usually once customers are happy with the tool, they run it fully automated, knowing that it's not going to cause any harm or detriment. That's there as an extra safety feature. You can then schedule how frequently you want this particular test to be run, on what day, on what week, on what time, who you want the report to go to at the end, and then you press play. So this is the main interface that you'll see, and it will tell you in the middle what it's doing at every point. We start by sniffing the network, running services enumeration to work out what these hosts are and what they're doing, what's Windows, what's Mac, what's Linux, what version of each. Is it a workstation, is it a server, and is it vulnerable to anything? Now, as we find vulnerabilities and look to exploit them, we start getting attacker achievements on the left-hand side as the box manages to carry out specific actions. So already here we skipped to 9 minutes in, it sniffed some user credentials on the network, cracked some passwords of the user that it found, validated those creds against the domain controller, and here just inside 10 minutes, the machine actually manages to get to domain admin level. Now, if this was an attacker on this network, they would own this network within 10 minutes. If this was a penetration tester, usually they wouldn't be able to get to this point that quickly, but often they could then say, look, we found what we needed to find, we've proven a route to domain admin, this is what you need to fix. The CySys tool won't stop there. It will keep looking for more vulnerabilities, more issues, more things that could be found in order to show you then, perhaps if there are 5 or 6 different ways to getting to domain admin, A, we uncover them all, but also B, we might be able to show you that there's one fix that will solve all of those issues for you. So even though it gets to that 10 out of 10, it won't stop. It will keep going, keep looking for more problems so that we give you a holistic view of every issue on the network and how you can resolve more of them as quickly as possible. So with that, we still have 25 approvals that are waiting to happen here in the top right corner. Things that we've said to the machine, don't do this without checking with me first. If we jump in here, we can filter the types of exploits that it wants to run by either the exploit type or the IP. It will show you then, this is what I want to do, this is the host I want to do it to. You can tick whether or not you're happy. If you leave these exploits unticked, it will not run them. If you do as we do here and tick them all and say, yep, I'm happy with all of these, go and run these exploits, see what else you find, you'll then get a load more attacker achievements populate on the left-hand side as it goes and does those things that you've now allowed it to do. So we're 11 minutes in here. The CySys machine has basically taken over this network, and if it were an attacker, could now essentially do whatever it wanted, depending on the intentions of that particular attacker. What we can do though, and this is where it gets more interesting, is click in any of these achievements on the left-hand side and get to view the attack vector. So this is a step-by-step flowchart of how this attack played out and the path that the attacker took. So if we click on the fact that we got to domain admin, we then get to see this vector here, which shows 3 different vulnerabilities which led to this achievement. Those vulnerabilities are the blue boxes along the top, and then a host of different steps that the machine took to get down to that domain admin phase. Now, if we take the first vulnerability here, that 5.5, the blue box that we see at the top, the problem there was that sensitive information could be sniffed on the network. There was a protocol that enabled the machine to sniff user credentials and traffic on that network. Once it sniffed them, the next problem was that multiple authentication attempts were made without being blocked. So that's the 6.0 vulnerability here. Because those authentication attempts were not blocked, the password of that user was then cracked, which is the 8.2 vulnerability. Having cracked that password, the machine validated those credentials against the domain controller and worked out that actually those credentials that I've managed to crack are that of a domain admin user. I now have domain admin access rights on this network, and essentially, as I said, could do what I want. Now, what's interesting here is that these 3 vulnerabilities are not to do with anything being unpatched or outdated. They are dynamic issues. So they're things, protocols and processes that aren't put in place that are essentially best practice. So some of you may have vulnerability management tools or vulnerability scanning tools on your networks. Those tools will not find these problems. You could have a patch perfect environment that's completely up to date. These issues can still be prevalent on that network. Now, what we can do is click into any of the boxes and get an insight as to, okay, what does this particular issue mean? If we click on the fact that sensitive information can be sniffed, essentially where the attack started, we get some insight on the right-hand side here in terms of what the protocol was that enabled the sniffing and what the recommended remediation is, in this case, it's that we turn off the protocol that enabled that traffic to be sniffed. What we can do is say, okay, we understand roughly what we need to do now, what the problem is. What would the impacts be if we fixed this issue? If you click this simulate fix button here, everything now grayed out is impossible for an attacker to do if we fix this problem. So we can visualize this and say, okay, great. If I fix one problem here, I solve this entire attack vector and I neutralize everything here and I stop this from being possible. What we can then show you is exactly how to go about fixing that problem. So we understand what the impact of that fix will be. If we click down the bottom on the detailed remediation advice link, this will take you to a wiki that's stored on the device that will give you a real simple breakdown of this is what the problem is. And if you follow these steps and procedures, you'll eliminate this problem from your environment. So not just showing you where the issues are, but showing you how to fix those issues to ensure that they are swiftly eliminated from your network in a very simple to follow step-by-step process. What the tool then goes on to do and show is that it will take information that it finds and not just report back on that and say, here's a problem, but do what an attacker would do. In essence, take information and see where else I can use that information. Perhaps I gather someone's login credentials, someone's username and password. It's then going to look to use that information to try and log into other devices to see how it can further an attack in exactly the same way that a malicious actor would do. All of these reports, these vectors can be added to your report at the end. So these visualizations of the path that was taken can all be added to your report, and that's fully customizable. If we move on to the reports, you see here we will run through every vulnerability that was found and grade it according to severity, the things that need to be fixed first and foremost. Every host that was picked up and which problems are within each host. Are any of them running software services that they shouldn't? Is there any shadow IT? Are there any vulnerabilities within these hosts that need to be dealt with? We'll run you through a full action report. Now this one's interesting because it will show you every single thing the machine attempted to do with a timestamp of when it tried it and where. But most importantly, on the right-hand side, a breakdown of whether the action that it looked to carry out was successful or not. So this is about showing, as I said, the good as well as the bad. If, for example, the CySys machine tried to inject a load of files to your devices and your antivirus blocked every single one, we know your antivirus is good, it's configured properly, it's doing what it should be doing. You don't need to invest any time, money or resource in fixing that because it's working. So that's great. If on the other hand, 70% of your passwords were cracked, we can point to the fact that actually some time needs to be spent in educating your users on what a good password is, looking at your password policy and whether it's up to scratch, and show you that actually that's an area you need to focus on. So we can ensure that time isn't wasted on investing in tools and processes that are actually doing their job, and show you where needs to be focused on to become more secure. The tool will then run you through the footprints that it took from the MITRE framework, which techniques were prevalent, and a summary report that will go through everything from a very high level. So how are you performing as an organization? What kind of score are you getting? How does that compare to the last time that you ran CISIS? And are you improving and heading in the right direction? How many actions were taken, of which how many were successful? What's your biggest problem area in terms of, is it that you've got too many high privileged users, weak passwords, easy to access data, an ability for attackers to move laterally with ease? We'll show you all of that and grade it for you. It will show you all of the vulnerabilities that were found, graded according to severity, all of the attacker achievements that were carried out, again, graded according to severity, with links to the remediation wiki to show you how to go and fix those particular problems. A breakdown of all the devices discovered, your password strength, how that performed. Now we've got sample reports of these. I'm conscious that it's going very fast here. So if anyone does want to see a sample version of these reports, then please do get in touch and we'll happily share that. But as I said, it's all customizable, and it will essentially give you everything that was found graded according to what needs fixing first and foremost. So that's everything for the product demonstration video. We have a couple more slides left to look briefly at what some of our customers have said. Now, CISIS is popular across all verticals. We have customers in healthcare, in education, in financial services, in legal, in insurance. Essentially, there aren't really any areas that CISIS isn't popular in. But one of the use cases that stands out is this one with Bolton NHS Foundation Trust, who were the first to deploy CISIS within the UK. Bolton had actually had a penetration test done the month prior to their CISIS deployment, which involved 3 guys on site for a 9-day project. Now, when they implemented CISIS and ran it, within the first half an hour of running that tool, they'd found more than those 3 human pen testers had during a 9-day project. They'd uncovered vulnerabilities that those testers didn't find. They'd picked up more user credentials. They'd got further and carried out more achievements. So to them, half an hour of utilizing CISIS equated to that of 27 working days of a human on site. And when you take into consideration the fact that the average penetration test costs £1,500 to £2,000 per day, that's a massive saving that they were able to make there in terms of what they found within that limited time period. So if we look then at business benefits, of what CISIS brings you, essentially the ability to test your network on a more frequent cadence, on a more frequent regularity, lends itself to these other benefits here. So if you can test your network on a constant basis, whenever a change is made, whenever you think there might be new risk, that then shows you where the problems are on a more frequent basis and how to deal with those problems. You're skilling up your internal team as to looking at what these problems look like. You're allowing them to be efficient in that anyone, as we've seen, it's a very easy tool to run this. You don't need to be a penetration tester or a security expert to operate that tool. You're skilling up your team as to what a threat looks like and how to deal with it, which of course, as you're finding these problems and dealing with them, is going to reduce your risk profile. And all of that can have cost benefits. I mean, the obvious one being that if you avoid the cost of a breach and everything that comes with that, that's a huge bonus for you. But it could also be that the tool uncovers that particular tools and processes aren't working, particular security products that you've bought perhaps aren't doing the job they were put in to do. You may be able to remove those costs and overheads in finding more efficient ways of doing things. So that's everything for a high-level overview to the CISIS tool and what it does. As I said, if anyone does have any questions following this, please do get in touch with Tom and the guys at EAC. They'll be happy to walk you through it. And if anyone would like to see the tool in action in a bit more depth, then please do reach out. Thank you everyone for your time today. Look forward to speaking to you all soon.